got the red blue. We got the red blue.
Imagine a subway system so breathtaking that it doubles as an art gallery, trains that arrive every 90 seconds at peak times, and a network so vast that it's the largest outside of China and the 8th largest in the world. Welcome to the Moscow Metro, a marvel of engineering, efficiency and beauty. Let's uncover the incredible story behind this underground masterpiece. The Moscow Metro is one of the longest and most efficient metro systems in the world, spanning over 400 kilometres with 15 lines and 258 stations. But this isn't just a metro system, it's a work of art, with each station telling its own story. Let's rewind. The idea of the Moscow Metro dates back to 1872, when engineer Vasily Titov proposed the concept. But under Tsar Nicholas II, the plans were plagued by delays, wars, financial troubles, and even opposition from the Orthodox Church. Fast forward to 1929, and Moscow was bursting at the seams. The tram system was running at 150% capacity, sidewalks were overflowing, and public transport was dangerously overcrowded. The industrialization and decolonization between 1929 and 1933 let Moscow balloon from 2.3 million to 3.6 million. That's 1.3 million in just 5 years. The city was desperate for a solution. Enter the Soviet Union. As Moscow became the new capital, the metro was envisioned as a grand symbol of Soviet progress. Lenin himself declared, "Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of a whole new country," and the Moscow Metro would embody this vision. Only when the country has been electrified and industry, agriculture and transport has been placed on the technical basis of a modern, large-scale industry, only then shall we be fully victorious, says Lenin. By 1931, the plans for the first stations were approved. Lazar Kaganovich was the man in charge for the design of the first line. This ambitious project was his own publicity campaign. The stakes were high, with the Soviet state throwing itself fully behind the project, and the reputation of many politicians, including Nikita Khrushchev, being on the line. Initially, an open-pit construction method was used, but this caused major disruption, and so they looked to the London Underground for inspiration, with British architects Charles Hold and Frank Pick, who had been working on London's very own Piccadilly line, being called on for consultation. They were in charge of figuring out the functional design using deep underground construction that was a feat of engineering that earned the Soviets major bragging rights. The Soviets themselves provided labour and artistic designs, guided by the principle of light and optimism in the building. But things didn't go smoothly. Soviet paranoia kicked in. The NKVD accused engineers of espionage, staged show trials, and eventually cut ties with the British consultants. Despite this turmoil, the project pressed on. The first line opened in May 1939. It was initially named the LM Kaganovich system, which obeyed Khrushchev, who believed that he had done most of the work. It was later renamed after Lenin when Khrushchev purged Kaganovich in 1957. The first line consisted of 13 stations between Sokolniki and Park Kulturi, which were ornate, gorgeously decorated, with 21,000 squares of marble being used in the stations alone, with these stations wanting to distance themselves from the bleak utilitarian transport hubs of other countries and present itself as museums and theatres. The Gorsky-Zamoskvorskaya line and the Arbatsko-Provoskaya linear line opened shortly after in 1938, following an Art Deco aesthetic with socialist themes. One of the crown jewels of the system is the Mayakovskaya station, a masterpiece of Soviet futurism, with its sleek stainless steel columns, pink rhodonite accents. The 14 ceiling mosaics, inspired by the poem Moscow Sky, is a vision of optimism and progress. During World War II, the station served as an air raid shelter and even hosted Stalin himself, who addressed party leaders here. Just like in London, the Moscow Metro provided much-needed shelter during the Second World War, and construction continued on with 7 new stations being opened during the war. The government had a crafty plan to press the big red button and destroy the metro system in the event of Moscow's fall to the Nazis. On October 1941, German soldiers had captured more than 600,000 Red Army soldiers, leaving the open road to Moscow seemingly open. On the 15th of October 1941, the State's Defence Committee decided to evacuate the top levels of government, giving orders to blow up businesses, warehouses and the underground railway equipment that could not be evacuated. By the 16th of October, the government's top dogs were prepared to flee. Panic grew in Moscow and businessmen opened their doors to allow fellow citizens to take their stock. Russia was on the brink of collapse, and if Stalin had fled, who it surely would have fallen. But their leader decided to stay, asking each of his Politburo, "Are we going to defend Moscow?" And so they agreed to stay and use fear to crush fear. And so the metro remained the beating heart of the city and lived on to see another day. By the 1950s, when war was over, the Cult Surveyor line, this time considered to be the peak of design and beauty of the Moscow system, was designed in an opulent style of Moscow Baroque. Known as the Circle Line, it orbits central Moscow and is said to have been suggested when Stalin himself placed a coffee cup on the map of the city and was inspired by the circular stain left behind. The line solves a major logistical problem the city was facing, enabling the transfer of passengers from across the city. One station that can be found on this line is the Komsomolskaya line, located under a busy square in central Moscow. Part of a long line of stations, those in the first southern segment of designs were dedicated to victory over Nazi Germany, whilst those in the northern segment were dedicated to the theme of post-war labour. Opened in January 1951, the roots of the station's design can be traced back to 1944, draft by Shuskev, who implemented a Petrine Baroque, inspired by 17th century Dutch Gold Age designs. But by the end of the war, the original drafts were discarded and the stations on the line were completed in the mainstream Stalinist style of this period. The design features a large octagonal dome with large imposing Corinthian columns and decorated with Baroque-style ornaments, including rich torches and chandelier lights. The theme of the design is the historical Russian fight for freedom and independence, expressed by 8 large ceiling mosaics designed by Pavel Korin. Korin was inspired by Stalin's speech at the Moscow Parade in 1941, where he inspired soldiers to remember the historical heroics of the Russian forefathers. The design celebrates Russia's historic battles for freedom, with mosaics depicting scenes like Alexander Nevsky in the Battle of the Ice, Dmitry Donskoy at Kulikovo, and Soviet troops atop the Reichstag in 1945. These mosaics aren't just decorated, they are storytelling on an epic scale, made from over 300,000 tiles. As time passed, the metro reflected the changing times of Soviet history. Moscow's mosaics were altered or replaced as political figures fell from favour. There was a mosaic of Red Army troops on the Red Square receiving the Guards banner from Soviet Army Command. But the drawings were censored later when some commanders depicted in the drawing had their legacy and careers re-evaluated, including Stalin himself. Most of the mosaic was replaced by that of Vladimir Lenin, addressing a meeting in the Red Square, moving the date of the artwork period between 1917 and 1922. Similarly, another image is of the Victory Parade when Soviet soldiers throwing captured Nazi banners in front of Lenin's mausoleum. This was retouched a number of times. When Lavrenti Beria was arrested in 1953, his glasses were erased and then the whole figure was removed. Then, in 1957, after the political crisis saw the ends of the careers of Vyacheslav Molotov and Lazar Kagnotkovich, their images followed suit. Finally, after 1961 brought to the end of Stalin's cult of personality, and in early 1963, the whole panel was taken down and Korin redesigned it by placing a maiden, symbolising Mother Russia, standing on Nazi banners in front of the same mausoleum, holding a hammer-on sickle up in one hand and a palm branch in the other. Komsomolskaya station represents the peak of Stalin's empire of architecture, characterised by mightiness, pomposity and classicism. And that's it for today's episode. As we covered, the Moscow Metro isn't just a subway, it's a living museum, an engineering marvel, and a symbol of resilience and progress. And that's it for today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed exploring the opulence, history and artwork. And if you enjoyed this dive into the Moscow Metro, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about the world. They come out every Tuesday. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.